The humiliation. The humiliation came disguised as charity. There I stood, before the entire congregation of Grace Community Church, clutching a food basket that barely held the weight of my shattered dignity. Pastor John smiled at the cameras for the Sunday service broadcast, announcing my name as the widowed mother in need whom our community embraces with love. 400 people watched me, as if I were a sideshow, their expressions flickering between pity and morbid curiosity. My 8-year-old daughter Lily tugged discreetly at the hem of my nicest dress, the only one I hadn't sold to pay the bills, whispering with tears in her eyes, "Mommy, why is everyone looking at us like that?" In that moment, under the studio lights burning my skin and the weight of 1,000 judging gazes, I knew I had hit rock bottom. But what no one suspected was that within that basket of shame, I carried a secret that would change everything. The path to that stage of humiliation had begun 2 years earlier, when Richard, my husband of 15 years, left without a word one Monday morning. There was no fight, no argument. I simply woke up, and he was gone. On the kitchen table, only a handwritten note: "I can't be the man you deserve anymore. Take care." As if it were possible to take care of oneself without a salary, without an explanation, without a goodbye. Lily still asked every night when Daddy would be back, and I invented stories about work trips that stretched indefinitely, swallowing my own tears to protect her innocence. For months, I lived on the illusion that he would return. I kept his clothes in the closet, his favorite mug in the sink, his picture on the nightstand. I used all our savings waiting for a phone call that never came, for an explanation that never arrived. When the money ran out, I started selling our belongings, piece by piece, memory by memory. First went the electronics he loved so much: the big screen TV, the car stereo, the laptop he used for work. Then my jewelry, including the wedding ring he had chosen with such care on a sunny December afternoon. Finally, we sold the living room furniture, leaving only the essentials to survive. I worked as a saleswoman at a small women's clothing store downtown, a job I landed after weeks of desperate searching. The salary barely covered the rent for our 2-bedroom apartment, which now felt like an empty palace echoing with absences. Bills piled up like insurmountable mountains: water, electricity, gas, Lily's school, groceries, pharmacy. Every envelope that arrived brought a new threat: service disconnection, credit report damage, legal action. At night, after putting Lily to bed, I sat in the kitchen with a calculator and stacks of bills, doing sums that never added up, trying to stretch the money like someone stretching a rubber band about to snap. The apartment's landlady, Mrs. Eleanor, a 70-year-old woman who had been kind during the first few months of late rent, started showing up at the door with increasing frequency. Her visits, once marked by tea and friendly conversations, turned into tense confrontations where she stamped her foot and threatened eviction. "Monica, you're a good person, but I have bills to pay too," she said, shaking her head with genuine sorrow. "I can't keep footing the bill. If you don't regularize the situation by the end of the month, I'll have to take legal action." Each word felt like a hammer blow to the coffin of my stability. That's when Jessica, my former coworker, who now attended Grace Community Church, appeared. She reached out to me on a Friday afternoon, when I was particularly despondent after receiving the 3rd collection letter from Lily's school. "Monica, I know you don't like talking about your struggles, but the church has an assistance program for vulnerable families," she said, touching my arm gently. "Pastor John is a very generous man, and I'm sure he can help you." Initially, I resisted the idea. I had grown up in a family where asking for help was synonymous with weakness, where independence was valued above all else. But desperation is a powerful current that sweeps away even the proudest. I scheduled a meeting with Pastor John on a Wednesday afternoon. His office was impressive: fine wood furniture, bookshelves filled with theological books, paintings of biblical landscapes covering the walls. He himself was an imposing man, tall and well-dressed, with a smile that seemed calculated to inspire confidence. "Sister Monica," he said, gesturing for me to sit in a leather armchair, "Jessica told me about your situation. God has a purpose for every trial in our lives." I told him about my husband's departure, about the financial difficulties, about my daughter, who didn't understand why we couldn't buy the ice cream she loved so much. He listened with a compassionate expression, occasionally making notes in a gold-covered notebook. "Our church," he explained, has a special program for widows and single mothers. We can offer monthly food baskets, help with medication, even assistance to keep Lily in private school. My eyes filled with tears of relief. Finally, a light at the end of the dark tunnel that had become my life. But, he continued, and his voice took on a more serious tone, our program operates transparently. We believe the community needs to see where their tithes and offerings are being applied. Once a month, during the Sunday service broadcast on television, we present the assisted families as a testament to God's love in action. My stomach clenched, but I was too desperate to refuse. In the following months, I became a regular attendee at Grace Community Church services. Lily and I always sat in the third row, her quietly playing with a rag doll, while I pretended to pay attention to the interminable sermons. The church's help truly arrived, baskets overflowing with non-perishable foods, vouchers for medicine, even a small monthly allowance that helped make ends meet. But along with the help came a price, the constant feeling of being watched, judged, categorized as a charity case by the other congregants. There was a specific group of women in the congregation who treated me with thinly veiled condescension. Led by Mrs. Eunice, the deacon's wife, they smiled with an artificial sweetness and asked invasive questions disguised as genuine interest. "How are you managing on your own, dear?" Mrs. Eunice would ask, tilting her head in that way people do when they're pretending to care. "It must be so hard raising a child without a father figure." Her friends would nod in agreement, like synchronized puppets. "Have you considered looking for a new partner? A woman your age shouldn't be alone," another would add, as if my life was a puzzle they could solve with their unsolicited opinions. On the other hand, there were genuinely kind people like Mr. John, the church janitor, who always had a genuine smile for Lily and occasionally gave her candy hidden in his pocket. Or Clara, a young woman in her 20s who volunteered in the children's department and treated my daughter with motherly affection, without questions or judgments. These small gestures of real humanity gave me the strength to continue enduring the curious stares and veiled comments. But it was one Thursday afternoon, while sorting through paperwork at home, that I discovered something that would completely change my perspective on everything. Among the accumulated mail, I found an envelope that had gone unnoticed, addressed to Richard Oliveira Silva, my husband. The sender was a law firm I had never heard of. Inside, a letter dated 3 months after his departure, informing him of the receipt of a substantial inheritance left by a distant uncle who lived in rural Minas Gerais. The amount mentioned made me sit heavily in the kitchen chair, 300,000 reais, plus a 15-hectare rural property. My mind worked frantically, connecting information that had previously seemed unrelated. Richard's mysterious outings in the months before he left, the whispered phone calls, the strange agitation I had attributed to work stress. He knew about the inheritance, and chose to leave before I found out, intentionally abandoning us to keep everything for himself. The pain of betrayal was like a punch to the stomach, taking my breath away and making the world spin around me. But along with the pain came something unexpected, a cold, calculating fury I didn't know I possessed. I sought out a lawyer in the city center, a small, nervous man named Dr. Anthony who practiced in a modest office above a pharmacy. He examined the documents with growing interest, adjusting his glasses as he read each line. "Mrs. Monica," he finally said, "legally, you are entitled to 50% of this inheritance. And considering that your husband abandoned his home and minor daughter without providing support, we can file for child support and division of assets that could result in even greater compensation." The legal proceedings were initiated discreetly. Meanwhile, I continued to attend church, smiling politely at Mrs. Eunice and her friends, accepting the food baskets, and playing the role of the helpless widow everyone expected to see. But now there was a different purpose in every gesture, a strategy behind every submissive smile. I was gathering strength, documenting everything, preparing myself for the right moment to reveal the truth. This is a story many women will recognize, for feminine strength often reveals itself in the most unexpected moments. If you have been following stories like this and want to continue receiving accounts of overcoming and transformation that inspire and move you, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next chapters of lives that, like mine, found light where there seemed to be only darkness. Lily began to notice changes in me that I thought I was hiding. "Mommy, you're happier," she said one morning, as we brushed our teeth together in the small bathroom of the apartment. "Your eyes are shining differently." A child's perception is sometimes sharper than an adult's, and she was right. For the first time in months, I felt I had control over my destiny. I was no longer a victim of circumstances, but a woman with a plan. Pastor John seemed increasingly interested in my personal story. During our monthly conversations, to renew assistance, he asked detailed questions about Richard, about the circumstances of his departure, about my feelings about the abandonment. God is preparing something special for you, Sister Monica, he said, leaning slightly toward me. Your story of faith and perseverance can inspire many people. He began to suggest that I give my testimony publicly, that I tell the congregation how the church had saved me from misery. Imagine the impact your words can have on the lives of other women going through similar situations, he insisted. The pressure gradually increased. Jessica, who had introduced me to the assistance program, began to casually mention how wonderful it would be if I shared my experience with the community. Mrs. Eunice and her friends began to comment on how I should be grateful for the church's generosity and how this gratitude could be expressed publicly. Even Lily, innocently, began to repeat phrases she had heard in Sunday school about testifying to God's blessings. The net was closing around me, and I realized that my participation in the charity program had a price that had not yet been fully revealed. It was a Tuesday morning when I received a call from Dr. Anthony with news about the case. Mrs. Monica, we have important information about your husband, he said, his voice brimming with barely contained excitement. We've tracked him down. He's living on a farm in rural Minas Gerais, registered a rural business in his name, and has been moving significant sums of money through his bank account. My heart pounded. Even more importantly, the lawyer continued, we've discovered he received an inheritance 8 months ago and didn't declare it officially. This significantly strengthens our case. That same week, Pastor John called me for a special conversation. His office was even more impressive than the first time, with fresh flowers in expensive vases and a new painting depicting the multiplication of the loaves and fishes. Sister Monica, he began, with that smile I now recognized as calculated, the time has come for you to return the blessings you've received. Next Sunday, during our special Thanksgiving service broadcast statewide, we'd like you to give your testimony. Tell how God used our congregation to transform your life. It wasn't an invitation, it was a demand disguised as a request. I tried to negotiate, citing shyness, fear of public speaking, and concern about Lily's exposure, but he was inflexible. Christian charity isn't one-sided, sister. Those who receive must also give. You received material help, now you can share your story as inspiration for others. The emotional blackmail was clear. If I refused, I'd likely lose the assistance. But I had a plan. Sunday arrived like a foretold storm. I wore my best dress, prepared Lily with the care of someone preparing for battle, and we arrived at the church 2 hours before the service. The television studio was being set up on the main altar, with professional cameras, powerful spotlights, and technicians scurrying about. Pastor John greeted me with exaggerated enthusiasm, introducing me to the program producers as our main story today. Mrs. Eunice and her friends surrounded me like vultures, adjusting my hair and dress as if I were a doll they were preparing for display. When the service began, 400 people filled the sanctuary. The cameras whirred, the lights blazed, and Pastor John began his sermon on the miracles of Christian charity in action. My stomach churned as he built the narrative of the destitute widow who had been saved by the congregation's generosity. Lily, beside me, held my hand tightly, sensing my tension even without fully understanding what was happening. And now, Pastor John announced with theatrical flourish, let's hear the moving testimony of Sister Monica Silva, whom God brought to us in a time of great need. Applause echoed through the sanctuary as I rose to my shaky feet. I walked to the pulpit under the weight of hundreds of gazes, the camera lights burning my skin and transforming the moment into a cruel exposure of my dignity. That's when something shifted within me. As I looked out at that sea of expectant faces, at the cameras that would carry my image to thousands of homes, at Pastor John smiling with anticipated satisfaction, I felt a strange strength taking hold of my body. I was no longer the defeated and desperate Monica, who had arrived here months ago. I was a woman who had discovered her own strength, who had information no one suspected, who no longer needed to submit to this humiliation. Brothers and sisters, I began, my voice coming out firmer than I expected. It's true that I went through very difficult times after my husband left without warning. Silence fell over the sanctuary. For months, I lived on this church's charity, receiving food baskets and financial aid, feeling grateful but also diminished. Pastor John nodded approvingly, expecting me to continue following the planned script. But I had other plans. However, I continued, and my voice gained a strength I didn't know I possessed. I recently discovered something that completely changed my perspective. I pulled the documents Dr. Anthony had given me from my bag. I discovered that my husband didn't leave because of weakness or inability to support us, as I imagined. He left because he received an inheritance of 300,000 riyas and preferred to keep it all for himself, deliberately abandoning his wife and daughter so he wouldn't have to share anything with us. A murmur rippled through the congregation. Pastor John tried to interrupt, but I continued. While I was ashamed to ask for charity, while my daughter asked why we couldn't buy the things she liked anymore, while I was selling our furniture to pay the rent, my husband was living comfortably on a farm in rural Minas Gerais, with money that was rightfully ours too. My voice echoed through the sanctuary, amplified by the microphones, carrying an emotion I could no longer control. Do you want to know what the real miracle is? I asked, looking directly into the cameras. The miracle wasn't the charity I received here. The miracle was discovering that I am stronger than I imagined. The miracle was learning that I don't need to submit to humiliation to survive. The miracle was understanding that my dignity is worth more than any food basket. Tears streamed down my face, but they weren't tears of shame. They were tears of liberation. Pastor John tried to grab the microphone, but I stepped back. This assistance program, I continued, should be about helping people in need, not about turning them into a spectacle to satisfy the curiosity of others and feed the ego of those who donate. True charity is silent, respectful, and preserves the dignity of the recipient. The silence in the sanctuary was deafening. People whispered among themselves, some seemed shocked, others visibly moved. So I announced, I no longer need your help. I've taken legal action to recover what's rightfully mine, and soon Lily and I will have our lives back. But I won't forget this experience. I'll use it to help other women going through what I went through, but without turning them into a spectacle. I paused, looking specifically at Pastor John. True charity is priceless. It doesn't demand reciprocity. It doesn't turn those in need into entertainment. I descended from the pulpit, amidst an awkward silence. Lily waited for me, eyes wide, not fully understanding what had happened, but sensing that something fundamental had changed. I took her hand, and we walked down the central aisle of the church under the astonished gaze of 400 people and the television cameras that were still recording. Each step was an affirmation of my regained dignity, each breath an act of liberation. Mrs. Eunice tried to intercept me at the exit, her expression a mixture of indignation and morbid curiosity. Monica, you can't do this to us. After everything we've done for you, she said, blocking my way. I looked at her with a calmness that surprised even myself. Mrs. Eunice, you did for me exactly what was convenient for you. I was the charity project that fed your egos. I'm not anymore. She recoiled, clearly disconcerted by my response. Mr. John, the janitor, waited for me at the street door with a genuine smile. Mrs. Monica, he said softly, you did the right thing in there. It had to be said. He bent down to Lily's height and gave her 2 candies, as he always did. Your mother is a very courageous woman, little one. You can be proud of her. Lily smiled, still not fully understanding the magnitude of what had happened, but sensing that something good was emerging from all that confusion. The following months were a time of intense transformation. The legal process moved quickly with the evidence we had collected. Richard was forced to attend a hearing, where I saw him for the first time since his departure. He was different, heavier, in expensive clothes, an air of prosperity that cruelly contrasted with the difficulties Lily and I had faced. When our eyes met in the courthouse corridor, he looked away with visible discomfort. There was nothing left of the man I had loved, only a stranger who had chosen money over family. The court ruling was favorable. In addition to the division of the inheritance, the judge ordered Richard to pay retroactive child support and compensation for moral damages for abandonment. The final amount was enough to buy our own apartment in a better neighborhood, and there was still enough left over to invest in a small business. Lily and I moved into our new home on a sunny October afternoon, carrying only the essentials, but mainly carrying renewed hope. Over time, I set up a small consultancy for vulnerable women, offering basic legal guidance and emotional support to those going through traumatic separations or family abandonment. My office, though modest, became a refuge for dozens of women who needed to rediscover their inner strength. Each story I heard reminded me of my own journey. Each tear wiped away confirmed that I had found my true purpose. Lily grew into a stronger, more independent girl. She never asked about her father again, as if instinctively understanding that our family was complete the way it was. On nights when we did our homework together at the table in our new kitchen, she would sometimes comment, "Mommy, you got prettier after we left that church." And I knew she wasn't talking about physical beauty, but about something deeper, the dignity I had regained, the strength I had discovered in myself. I never again needed charity from others, but I learned true generosity. I help other women not to feel superior or to feed my ego, but because I recognize in them the same pain I once felt, the same need for genuine support that I once had. The difference is that my help comes with no strings attached. It doesn't demand reciprocity. It doesn't turn the recipient into an object of pity or curiosity. Today, when I pass by Grace Community Church, I see other faces in the assistance program, other women being exposed on the altar of spectacle charity. My heart aches for them, but it also fills with hope, because I know that each one has within her the same strength I discovered I had. Sometimes I think about returning there, not as a beneficiary, but to talk to these women, to tell my story, to show that there is life and dignity beyond dependence on others. The real transformation didn't happen on the day I received the compensation money, nor when I bought our apartment, nor when I opened my business. The transformation happened that Sunday, in front of the cameras and the congregation, when I chose truth over convenience, when I prioritized my dignity over need, when I discovered that my voice had power and that my story could inspire other women to find their own strength. Today I know I am much more than a helpless widow who once needed help. I am a woman who went through the fire of adversity and emerged stronger, who transformed pain into purpose, humiliation into motivation, abandonment into independence. Lily has a mother she can admire not for perfection, but for the courage to start over, for the honesty to acknowledge mistakes, for the determination to never again submit to anything that diminishes her humanity. The deepest lesson I learned is that our true strength lies not in the absence of hardship, but in how we choose to face it. It's not in never falling, but in always getting back up. It's not in being invincible, but in being resilient. And most importantly, it's not in relying on the approval or charity of others, but in recognizing our own worth and fighting for it with the dignity we deserve. Every woman carries within her a silent strength that can move mountains when awakened. Sometimes we need to walk through the darkest valley to discover the light that shines within us. Sometimes we need to hit rock bottom to discover that we can fly. And sometimes we need to lose everything to discover that we are more valuable than anything we can possess. This is my story, but it's also the story of all of us who were once underestimated, diminished, humiliated. It's proof that we can reinvent ourselves, that we can rise again, that we can transform scars into stars. The silence that once screamed inside me has now transformed into a voice that echoes to other women. You are stronger than you imagine, more valuable than you believe, more capable than the world wants you to think. And when you discover that, as I did, nothing will ever diminish you again.